The Sorry to Bother You is about Cash and Detroit, who live in Cash's uncle's garage. He begins working at Regalview as a telemarketer, and in his few days is not doing too hot, until he's introduced to the idea of a white voice. In using his white voice, he begins to crush being a caller. Eventually, all his friends begin to protest in support of labor unions, and before you know it, Cash is offered a position as a power caller by this man. In doing this, he basically begins to work for Worry Free, a corporation that monopolizes on cheap indentured servitude. This is Mr. Blank. He is never named, but is a big player in guiding Cash along through his journey through Worry Free, and both always speak in their white voice. Eventually, his friends and his girlfriend continue on with their lives, and Cash gets an offer from the CEO, an offer of $1 million to become the Equisapien MLK. What's an Equisapien, you ask? This. Half man, half horse. Eventually, Cash has a video of the Equisapiens on his phone and decides he wants to expose Worry Free for their controversial practices. In turn, they begin to exploit him, and the CEO of Worry Free is making bank. The end of the movie then has Cash, once his offer has expired, turning into an Equisapien and breaking into the CEO's house.
The movie Sorry to Bother You was written, produced, and directed by Boots Riley. This was his first film. He was previously known as a singer in the groups The Coops and Street Sweepers Social Club. He grew up in Oakland, California, and was born to two parents who were social activists in Chicago. This led him to lead a life of activism himself. He was inspired to write this film because of his experience working in telemarketing and fundraising in California. He found success in his job when discovering the power of his white voice. This motivated him to develop the character Cassius from his own experiences. He wrote the film back in 2012 during the Obama administration, which the film was not specifically targeting a political movement or figure. However, the final script was changed to target the Trump administration. For example, the Worry Free campaign is supposed to draw parallels to the Make America Great Again mentality. When writing the film in 2012, he had no intention to producing the film. Then as time went on, he believed the film was important. He explains the film as an absurdist dark comedy with aspects of magical realism, which he defines as a realistic view of the modern world while adding magical elements. He highlights two themes within the film, which are capitalism and false consciousness, which we discuss later in this video. An important theme that motivated Riley to write the film was the idea of puppets behind the puppet master, which is represented in the relationship between Mr. Blank and Steve Liff. And it's important to him to bring a creative element into the movie because he believes art can answer and ask questions. He believes his creative style of the film answers questions toward the creation of our capitalist society, however, asks critical questions directed toward our political system.
When examining the political economy within which Sorry to Bother You was created, viewers must note that it is a film written during the Obama era, but it didn't hit movie theaters until December 2018, 2 years into Trump's presidency. Riley noted that he aimed to avoid directly attacking an elected politician in order to mitigate audience backlash. As April briefly mentioned, Riley had originally written the slogan, "Worry Free, Make America Great Again," but decided to remove this line from the final script. When performing a textual analysis of Sorry to Bother You, we can look to the dominant reading of this text to see a scathing indictment and condemnation of the entire system of capitalism, whose lifeblood is the exploitation and suppression of Black identity. An oppositional reading of this media text, however, would reinforce the capitalist ideals that seek to further exploit, produce, and monetize bodies. In terms of audience reception, Riley was careful to construct the world of Sorry to Bother You so as not to disturb audiences so deeply that they would dismiss the message of this movie. Riley was quoted as saying, "In trying to avoid cliche, I realized that if I bent the reality of the world that was there, it actually drew attention to the parallel point in our actual reality." It's also interesting to note that this is not a well-known film, and those who have heard about the film know little about it. While Sorry to Bother You is marketed as a comedy, it blends conventional comedy with political satire to produce an effect that generates laughter and discomfort in equal doses.
In addition, our group wanted to understand how Sorry to Bother You was a commentary on the way that capitalism influences our everyday culture as well as personal behaviors. So this is seen in our analysis of the way that Cassius adopts a white voice in order to be really successful and ultimately be granted a promotion as a power caller in the early parts of the film. Early on, Cassius didn't have much luck with his normal voice and was often getting hung up on by many of the people he was calling. Consequently, he changed into a white voice that allowed him to make a lot of really high value sales and get this promotion. So this is what we call code switching, where Cassius directly understood that in order to be successful at his job, he had to mimic traditionally white sounding voices and in general white behavior. This really is a great commentary on the way that capitalism values white appearances, white behavior, and in order to be really successful in certain types of industry, you have to fall in line with these demands. This comes as no surprise, as many of the capitalist labor structures were created by white men, and therefore the things that they value directly reflect those types of identities. As our group tried to analyze recurring patterns that happened throughout Sorry to Bother You, we noticed a really constant and thought-provoking critique of capitalist labor systems and the way that it influences culture and the behavior all around us. So the first kind of pattern that we wanted to focus on is the worry-free business model that we mentioned earlier in our video. So to give some background, one of the centrally antagonizing forces in this film is a company called Worry Free. This company claims to provide employees with an all-encompassing work-live experiences. In this highly regulated enclosed facility, work-free employees complete daily tasks such as manufacturing jobs in exchange for their sleeping arrangements, food, and daily interactions for one another. Throughout the film, it's stressed that a lot of people that enter into these worry-free living conditions can't usually pay their bills and are usually forced into these situations out of desperation. A central criticism throughout the movie of many of the characters, such as Cassius, is that these worry-free labor structures really resemble modern-day slavery. These representations that are seemingly an innovative labor structure really in reality are exploiting people that are desperate for mere subsistence and kind of sell themselves into this labor structure that ends up really exploiting them. Our group wanted to consider questions that are really brought up by this worry-free labor structure, such as, do we work to live, or are we really living to work? In addition, these representations of perhaps the future of American labor really call one to question the history of capitalist labor structures, specifically how capitalism has really been born out of slavery. So specifically unsafe working condition, long hours, and a lack of general autonomy have all come to define modern capitalism, as they were permitted and even celebrated during the times of chattel slavery. Therefore, the worry-free business structure really makes you not only consider the future of American labor, but also consider its really fraught history. Can you stop the video? And then.
In film Sorry to Bother You, the workforce is representative of the equisapien species, which are employees of the Worry-Free Company who have been transformed into half-men, half-horse breeds of creatures manufactured to produce a faster and more efficient workforce. In an attempt to expose Wrigley for their exploitation of the working class on behalf of cheap slave labor, Cassius's idea backfires as the company's economy begins to surprisingly boom. The world doesn't even seem to bat an eye, and businesses are able to freely take advantage of consumerism in the market of a modern-day slave trade due to hegemonic ideals of capitalism within the society. The workhorse of the film illustrates the American radical economics of today as it focuses on the need to maximize profit based around factors of supply and demand, the driving force behind production, pricing, and consumption of goods and services. The demand for slave labor by one of the biggest consumers of Regal Beef Company, Worry Free, encouraged the manipulation, exploitation, and even alteration of humans to develop a more profitable supply of workers.
Our group believes that Sorry to Bother You is a really excellent commentary on the way that capitalism has evolved into 21st century America. We believe that it's really important to examine within a media text the way that industry and labor affects the culture, politics, and economics in the world around us. Specifically, we think that this film really essentially highlights the way that capitalist forms of production systematically disadvantage people of color. This is very apparent when you analyze the history of capitalist forms of production that find their roots in American slavery. The way that Sorry to Bother You highlights these labor practices and helps us understand capitalism and the way that it's racialized in the United States is really essential and is not being done in many media texts today. Therefore, we hope and believe that in the future, more of these types of films will be coming out. Thanks so much for watching our video.